So it has been a while. I think it's been like 6 weeks since my last video went up. So my name's Jackie. You might have forgotten that. I wouldn't blame you. Um, I used to make authortube videos once a week, and I have taken a couple of smaller breaks since I started in 2019, but this is definitely the longest. So I thought I'd do this casual chatty video as a way of just checking in and letting you know what I've been up to and why I took the break. So the last time I filmed it was during Camp NaNoWriMo, so let's start there. In camp, I had a couple of different goals. The first one was to prepare my YA Superheroes Meets the Russian Mafia book Powerless for working with a book coach, because I had a friend who was doing a book coaching certification and she needed to do a manuscript critique. Then I also wanted to query Powerless. I tried to go back to my fantasy hot mess, and I also had like the background goal of maybe I'll start something else if my fantasy hot mess isn't going so well. Because I did have a number of different goals, I ended up doing a time goal rather than like a word count goal. And I actually achieved that, I think, on the 14th of April. So the first couple of weeks were really, I won't even say productive, but I just spent a lot of time on these things because researching agents and drafting query letters and looking for other authors' query letters takes a lot of time, and I wasn't expecting that. So I hit my goal quite early on, but for the second half of April, I did try to stay on track, and it was only really in the last week that... So I did hit my goal quite early on. I exceeded my goal just with the Powerless work alone, and then I went back to my fantasy hot mess, which is a project I had been working on since Christmas 2020. It has a long and not sordid history, but a long history. I originally wrote it when I was 19 at university, then picked it up again, I'm going to say in 2017, and sort of looked at it on and off until 2019 was when I went, okay, I'm going to be a writer, I'm going to be committed, and that was when I finished the second draft of that, and I still knew it didn't work, but at least I had a draft. And then, yeah, this year was going to be the year when I fix it and made it work and made this story and these characters that I love in my head come to life. And that didn't go so well, so I even filmed some videos about the process, but yeah, I don't know if I should publish them or not, just because like that feels like a long time ago now that I've moved on from the project. But basically it didn't go so well. I went back to working with the anatomy of the story and tried to use the plot chapter to get a better outline, which didn't work. I ended up removing one of my point of view characters and still felt like I had too much to organize in a coherent way without it feeling like a lot of plot and no story, as one of my friends says. And yeah, I got to the end of April and I had this realization, which was no part of working on Fantasy Hot Mess has actually been enjoyable. And that isn't to say that every part of working on a fiction project should be enjoyable, because ideally, if you sell your books, it is a job, it is a discipline, it's something you should work at, but at least some of it should be enjoyable. And when I reflected, and like even if I looked at the old vlogs, I'm sure I'd see that I was just sort of trying to push through and get it done, and I was like, I didn't mind thinking about it so much and trying to reorganize the puzzle, but when I compare it to Powerless, like Powerless, yes, it was a challenge to write as well, but there were parts in the writing process when I'm like, yes, this is working so well, it's good. And every time I've reread it, even with the areas that can be improved, every time I've reread it, I've loved the story, I've loved the characters, I've had so much fun. And even rereading my fantasy hot mess, like it just felt like a chore. So I got to the end of April and thought, okay, I think I need to give up on this project. And yes, I might pick it up again in a couple of years, but for now, I just don't know how to fix it, and yeah, it's not enjoyable, and maybe I'd have better luck if I was working on something that I did enjoy. So that's where I was when I stopped filming. I had tried doing a little bit about getting back into Fantasy Hot Mess, and it didn't go so well. And then life happened, and good things happened, but there was just a lot happening at once. So my work takes a lot of mental energy. I'm head of marketing at a crypto company, and I never intended to be a head of marketing, so I'm not really, like, I do the work. I think I'm, mostly what I bring to the table is organization and in a company that isn't very organized a lot of the time. So I think I do it well, but it's not really my natural space. So it does take a lot of mental energy. But yeah, work takes a lot of mental energy. And then I had a bunch of things happening that got added on top of the work. And I was just feeling exhausted. And I've had issues with fatigue in the past. And I feel like for the last, for 2020 and 2021, it's been getting worse. And what I would usually do to address that is take like a month or two off and go traveling and recharge. And that's not really an option when the world is still closed. So I realized I was feeling exhausted pretty much every day and didn't really have any energy to do anything beyond what I absolutely had to get done. So I decided I was going to take the month of May off from writing. And I didn't intend to take it off from authortube, like I was still planning to do videos, but clearly that didn't happen. And the reason for that is just there was a lot of other stuff happening. So I've mentioned my job, which is full-time, but even the job has extended to be more than full-time sometimes. Like every second Wednesday, I've got a call that's at 7:30 and it goes to between 8:30 and 9, so that evening is gone. But aside from the job, I got approved for my Swiss residence permit, which is really exciting. If you're newer here, I am an Australian, I live in Estonia, and my husband and I are planning to move to Switzerland because the company I work for is Swiss, and I started there almost a year ago now. So the residence permit finally got approved, which is really exciting, but then that started the logistics of applying for visas. And this is so stupid. Like I know there's at least one Swiss person who watches these videos, so I'd be curious to hear what you think about this process in the comments. But basically, I have an approved residence permit in Switzerland that I need to go and collect. I need to apply for a visa in order to enter the country to collect my residence permit. But if I was just visiting Switzerland as a tourist, I could stay there for 90 days without a visa. So I don't know why I can't just go there and get the permit as long as it's within that 90 days. But I need to apply for a visa. Now, there is no Swiss embassy in Estonia. The closest one is in Stockholm, Sweden, which manages all of like the Nordic and Baltic states. So that's okay. It means I need to send off my documents, my passport to Sweden in order to get this back. The problem is, in May, I had to go to Dubai for a week for a work conference. And all of this was confirmed like at the very end of April. So I was like, oh, I could send my passport off now, but what if it doesn't get back in time for the conference? So there was sort of this month of things being on hold for my own visa application. But now, like I got back from Dubai a week ago, so now I have no passport. It's in another country, but that's happening. So thing one is the job. Thing two is I had this visa application. Thing three is my husband's visa application. So I'm getting a residence permit for employment. He is getting a visa as my spouse. So he's basically piggybacking on my residence permit. And unlike Estonia, where you can just show up on your tourist visa and apply for everything here, again, we need to do it in advance. Now, my visa, when I sent it to Stockholm, supposedly will take 4 days before coming back. Postage is obviously longer, that's why I didn't want to do it before Dubai, because Estonia's postage is quite slow, but 4 days at the embassy and then it'll come back. My husband's visa will take 8 to 12 weeks. So, first, in fact, even before the time frame, he has a whole lot of documents he needs, far more than I do. Like he needs his own ID documents, multiple copies of each. He needs my ID documents as part of his application and multiple copies of each. He needs our marriage certificate, the original and copies. And he needs to be enrolled in a French course and he needs to either pass an A1 French exam or he needs to be enrolled in a French course. Now, my husband doesn't have an A1 level of French. He speaks what he calls ancient high French, which is like saying le cheese de Suisse, which is obviously not French. He's not going to pass this exam. So I needed to enroll him in a class. And that was like a process of a good week and a half because all of the classes recommended by the official site, none of them got back to me when I emailed them. I reached out to my colleagues to see what they recommended. They sent me a language school, which I contacted, and over the summer they only do intensives, which are like 3 weeks and 2 hours every night of the week for 3 weeks. And Drew was like, well, I don't really want to do an intensive like that in summer because summer's short and it would be nice to go out in the evenings, which is understandable, but at the time I was a bit annoyed and just like, suck it up, we've just got to enroll you in this course. So then, this is really bad actually, I've got a marketing intern who started working with me because work was so busy, and in his first week I'm like, can you research French courses for me, which is not part of his job, but he had the time. So he sent me a list of French courses. I contacted all of them. We found one, enrolled him, printed out the confirmation, and that went into his application. So we did all of his documents, which took maybe 2 weeks because there was a lot of back and forth with the French classes, and there was one he even spoke to. Sent off his stuff, and then it's 8 to 12 weeks from then, so which was like mid-May, so let's say the 15th of May, plus add 2 weeks for postage because Estonia is slow. So that's 10 to 14 weeks. Now, my residence permit actually has an expiry if I don't collect it, so it's going to disappear on the 13th of July if I don't go and collect it. So obviously we can't move to Switzerland then because my husband isn't going to have his visa yet. Like, he's going to get it by the end of July, probably, or beginning of August. So then I started looking into, well, can I go to Switzerland just to collect the residence permit and go back? And the short answer is yes now, but when I was originally looking at it, it looked like no, that wouldn't be the case, because even with a negative PCR test, I would still need to do 10 days of quarantine in Switzerland. And it's like, well, I can do 10 days of quarantine, but that's quite expensive. Like, can work cover it? And work said they'll cover the flights for me to go there and back, but not the accommodation for that 10 days. So I was like, look, that's going to be a bit expensive. So they've basically negotiated with the local government to write me like a permission letter so I can go there and go back in the same day. So hopefully nothing goes wrong with that. But the reason I'm going into all of this detail about stuff that's not relating to writing or authortube at all is that there was a lot on, and it's not like anything went wrong with this visa stuff. It was just a lot of logistics and a lot of moving bits where you're going, okay, this comes in at this date, and then we've got to do this here, and you're trying to plan out your life, basically. Like, we're moving countries, and you can't really plan that much because you don't know when anything's going to happen. Like, at the moment, the big variable is Drew's visa, because we can't move until we get that. So when do we give notice on our apartment, for example? When do we book our flights and accommodation for when we first arrive in Switzerland? So having the job, plus this trip to Dubai for work, plus the visa stuff, plus positive thing was that Estonia came out of lockdown in mid-May, so we'd had our second lockdown of the year. Everything had been closed for about 2 months. So we came out of lockdown, which meant I could see friends again and go to the gym again, all of which is positive, but just more things getting added to the schedule at once. So with all of that happening, and I was already feeling like worn out and creatively drained, I just went, okay, I think the safest thing to do now is to take a little bit of time off writing, because I don't even want to say even if I pushed through, because the thing was, I felt like I was already pushing through at that stage. Like, everything I was doing for Fantasy Hot Mess was just, it was just a slog. Like, I was really, really working hard to get through it, and I didn't really have any way to recharge from that. And I thought, I can keep doing this, but I'm not getting anywhere. Like, I think it would have been different if I felt like I was making meaningful progress, but all I was doing was spending hours and not really writing anything new or finding new inspirational solutions. And I also thought about switching over to something new. But with all of that on, the thought of like trying to do something new, and even, to be honest, the thought of like trying to document it in this way, like taking videos as I went, was just like more than I was mentally able to process at the time. And I just thought, okay, I'm giving myself permission to take the month of May off. We'll see how I feel at the end of the month, and then hopefully come back to it. So the end of May has passed. It is now like a week into June. I think today is the 6th. And I'm not sure where to go from here. I definitely don't want to go back to Fantasy Hot Mess. I do think letting that go was the right decision. Part of me thinks that maybe I will never write that book. And Victoria Schwab, who I'm a big fan of, despite my Addie LaRue video, one of the things she's talked about in her early career is that her first book was good enough to get her an agent, but it wasn't good enough to get published. And people sometimes ask her about it now, and she's said she's never going to publish that book because it just wasn't good enough. But she's taken elements of that book and used them in other places. And part of me thinks, like, maybe I'll take some of these characters and use them somewhere else, or some elements of this world and use it somewhere else. And I haven't been completely persuaded to take that approach yet, because part of me thinks, oh, maybe in a couple of years I will be able to fix it. And if I've, taken Perry out of that world and put her somewhere else, then I've got a big hole in this world. So at the moment I'm not doing anything with it, but I'm also aware that it's highly likely this book is not fixable. Yeah, this book is not fixable. I don't think there's any way to do everything I was trying to do in a single book and have it make sense and be coherent. Well, that's a bit of a double up, isn't it? Make sense and be compelling. And that's disappointing because I loved this world and these stories, and I love the, themes and the existential conflict, but it wasn't working. So now I'm like, maybe that book will never get published. It was a great experiment when I was 19, and now as more of a grown-up writer, maybe I'll be able to repurpose some parts of that. So that's where I am with Fantasy Hot Mess, and it means I'm not sure where to go next because I have a couple of options. I have a project that I started last year in Camp NaNoWriMo and ended up stopping when I had the interview process for this job. So you can see this job has been great for my writing. And if anyone from work happens to see this, don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. But yeah, it was easier to write before I had this job. So I have this reciprocal stalking project that I could pick up, but I don't think that makes sense from a career perspective, because if I get a deal with Powerless, then I should have something else in the YA sci-fi fantasy space. So I think that one will continue to be on hold. And I was also thinking about doing like retelling Final Fantasy X, sort of. If you look at I think it was my last video, I talked about something from the Storygrid podcast called the Masterwork Experiment, where basically you deconstruct something that you think is a masterwork and then find all of the same beats and themes and you use them to create something that should be a completely original story, but it will work because it takes everything that works from the other things. So I was thinking of Final Fantasy X, so maybe that. And then the other one is I had a dream recently which didn't have any story so much, but there's some really clear imagery for the world, so I'm thinking about playing with that as well. But yeah, I'm not sure, like even doing this video is tiring and I have a feeling my camera is going to overheat very soon, so I should probably wrap up. Yeah, aside from everything I've had on for the last month, like professionally and personally with the visas and the jobs and the trip, like all I've really been doing in my free time is reading and playing PlayStation, and this is why I don't play PlayStation, because it's addictive. So from here I'm actually not sure where to go. Part of me thinks I should start something brand new just so it doesn't come with any baggage of anything I've thought about or worked on in the past. Yeah, I just don't know if I have it in me, and honestly that scares me because like I was supposed to be committing to being a writer, and yet I haven't written anything new. Like I haven't finished a new project since 2019. And that's not how writers work, especially YA writers, because like YA authors need to publish quite frequently because their audiences are going to age out of their work quite soon. So yeah, I don't know what to do. And I don't really have anywhere to go from here, to be completely honest. Like, I sat down to talk to the camera thinking, oh, this is going to be an interesting discussion about creative burnout and writing, and it just ended up being me babbling to the camera for 20 minutes about visas. But anyway, this is where I've been for the last 6 weeks. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking around. If you have any suggestions for how to get out of a writing rut or get out of creative burnout, please leave them in the comments below. If you have any questions or ideas or things you'd like to see a video on, also let me know, because maybe that'll be a good starting point for whatever the next project is. Other than that, give me a like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will see you next time. Bye.